first person of African descent to publish a book of poetry in the English language in all of history was Phillis Wheatley. Phillis Wheatley, who came here at the age of 7, came to Boston, arrived in Boston Harbor on a ship called the Phyllis. And that's how she got her name. And her master and mistress, John and Susanna Wheatley, were petty merchants. He was a tailor in Boston. They needed a house servant, and they got her for a song. She was the last slave purchased from that boat in Boston Harbor. In 1761, and 4 years later, she wrote her first poem in English. And by 1770, she was a celebrity. She was the Toni Morrison of the 18th century. And September 5th, 1773, she published the first book of poetry by a black person. Nobody in Boston believed that she had written the poems herself because they said Africans weren't smart enough to write poetry. So they had to send her to London with a certificate of attestation signed by the 18 most respectable characters in Boston. That's how they identified themselves, including John Hancock, the John Hancock, and the governor of the colony of Massachusetts, and the lieutenant governor. They gave her an oral exam to see if she'd really written her poems, and even then, the Boston printers wouldn't publish the book, so they sent her to London that summer. Benjamin Franklin came from France just to meet her, to see an African who had written a book of poetry, and Voltaire wrote a letter to his friend in 1774 saying, you see, Africans are equal because Phillis Wheatley has published a book of poetry.